It was near dusk and snowing when I first saw the town at the river's edge. I had ridden my horse through many villages and towns scattered about the open plain on my passage to the east. All but this one had been deserted, and it was calling to me with the tolling of its church bell. As I drew near, I witnessed a silent, solemn procession silhouetted against the rising full moon. Revelers, weary and footsore, were bringing their guests of honor to the graveyard. The bridge we had all hoped to cross was gone, and because of its untimely demise, the town's western half was becoming densely populated with the living, the dying, and the dead. As if in taunting mockery, the town's extension on the river's far shore was silent and empty, for its people had long since gone to the east. I was merely the latest of many hopeful who had arrived, stared at the broken bridge, and finally found a place among their peers. Many had hoped that the river would freeze or part to allow us to go on, but I knew neither would happen. We cared for each other as best we could, and members of our motley congregation who had died were brought to a different place of waiting, as befitted their change in social status. At dusk, we carried and placed them on the hallowed ground within the graveyard walls, for we hadn't the tools or strength for digging in the frozen, uncaring earth, nor sufficient wood to send their bodies aloft. The bell was tolled in the hope the dead would come to claim their own. I lived among them for many days before I had the dream. My soul was called to the graveyard by a young girl I had carried there that evening. The girl and I had often talked and stared at the river together, hoping to learn a way to cross. What had eluded us in life had been given to her in death, and now she wished to talk with me again. I was to build a raft, and if I would but look about, I would see that all that was needed to build it had already been provided for. Once it was built, I was to ferry the townspeople to the eastern shore until another came to take my place. I looked about and spoke to the town to find those whom I needed. All helped to build the raft, most by their silence, many by arguing only among themselves, and a few with their backs and hands. An abandoned farmhouse tottered near the graveyard walls, and with a little encouragement from our backs, we hastened its collapse. As we had planned, one of its walls fell in the icy road and became the base of the raft. A portion of its roof was to become its floor. However, we knew that this alone would not have carried us across the river, so we placed the dead between the wall and the roof. To keep them in their place, we tied the raft together with pieces of the church bell's rope. For a while, the living would not toll for the dead. During the night, we pushed and pulled our creation through the middle of the town. We had hoped for an uneventful launching, but our efforts drew many from the comfort of their fires and each other. Few who rose followed as we passed, and fewer still followed us far. The raft was launched in silence and without christening. My followers and I watched over it lest some angry soul rise up and destroy it. Within a week, most had passed to the east, but the raft, like the river, had divided families and friends. Fights were common. Many chose to remain behind, only to change their minds a few days later, and cross with the vain hope of finding those who had gone before them. Few chose not to cross at all, but their numbers dwindled with time. I gave my horse to my little friend's family and spent my nights on the eastern shore. A horn was to be blown when the raft was needed, and upon hearing it, I would come. My passengers often spoke with those below. Looking through cracks and holes in the floor, they spoke of many different things. Of the need for forgiveness for some past wrong, or to offer thanks for their passage. Sometimes they just looked at each other, but few ever spoke to me.
They woke up in the room. 2 people. A man and a woman. Old school friends. They have been together many times over the years. They were there for no particular reason. How long they had been there was unknown. Their only external sense of time was a small wall clock with its hands permanently fixed to 12:13. There were no windows, but as if in consolation, the room's walls were a drab, nondescript color. Similar to a dull light. Things usually appeared and remained only as needed, as if they were afraid of wearing out their welcome. The only sounds they heard were the sounds that they made. The only light was from a ceiling fixture with a single bulb that never burnt out. They dare not break it, lest it not be replaced. There was a door, but they hadn't opened it for a very long time. Opening the door revealed a nothingness that they used to play with by throwing objects into it and watch them soundlessly disappear the moment they left the room. Nothing bounced back. Dinner dishes were easy to dispose of. No fuss, no muss, just throw it out the door. It wasn't like a door in many other ways as well. No bills came, nor salesmen, no sunshine. But they could always open it or close it. tried to explore beyond the room by putting out a toe, a finger, and a hand, and finally an arm, but stopped short of using their heads. Each time the result was the same, be it a toe or a couch. Anything passing beyond the door threshold steadily disappeared and would only reappear as was pulled back in, as long as someone remained attached to it. Worse, they felt nothing beyond the room, not even their own fingers, or a feeling that their fingers were still there. They waited for other people or animals to appear, hoping to end their lonely stay. Prayer, begging, abstinence, nothing brought them. Finally, they simply left the door shut. Neither discussed it, only to be awakened by a little dog inside the room, scratching and barking at the closed door. Clearly, the dog wanted out, and he seemed to know what was on the outside. The both of them were scared, and after much arguing, they flung the door open, and the dog ran out and disappeared. The two of them waited for what must have been months. One keeping vigil, while the other slept, always with the door wide open. But the dog never came back. Finally, they closed the door and went to bed, hoping never to open the door again. Only to be awakened by a knocking at the door. They jumped up mindless, falling all over each other, trying to reach the doorknob, but they couldn't budge it for fear of what lay beyond. They sweated and cursed, encouraged, and praised, but the knocking continued. And finally, they took a deep breath, followed by a scream. Ah! It began to open the door again. The knocker looked inside and clearly saw that nobody was there.
think we're going. I was talking to a friend this morning. Two people sitting in their respective parts of the world, trying not to discuss estimates and how many of us are left. The finest disappearing act ever known. However, the audience appears to be leaving with the act. As if some magician were popping us all back into a big hat. Machines, art, writings, buildings, and other human works remain untouched and show no signs of following their leaders. I hope we don't need them where we're going. Explanations of the fading are piously defended and followed by their leaders. Some listen to the old, some to the young, and some to idiots. None to each other. My friend thinks we're characters in a senile author's play. My husband heard this and wondered if God had somehow gone senile. My husband left today. Like the dead, none return to advise those left behind. And we mourn as one, for perhaps only the second time in our history. We are united in our nothingness. Could we have finally come full circle to join with Cain's kin to be human no more? Looking about, I sense that in reality, humanity is simply a worn, unraveling tapestry, and each member no longer recognizes the importance of each thread. Perhaps the fade began when a lynch mob fashioned a noose out of a loose thread at tapestry's edge, their victim's weight, bringing first them down and then ever more people into chaos. More leave with each uncaring snicker, an unheeded cry for help. Anyone reading this is welcome to it, and anything else I've left behind. If you're not human, I advise you to leave. The fading started only several decades ago by my reckoning, and the same fate may in turn be yours. If you find us, can you let me know?
It's Labor Day. Again. Time for the annual pilgrimage. Very few people can listen to their child when the mountains are pretty and Santa's village lies just on the road. The best things in life are free, so Santa's village must be even better. The streaming asphalt floor will have to wait. Santa's village delivers its promises: a reindeer park, masonry elves, and a Santa to tell your heart's desires to. A toy car, freedom. A doll, love. A toy soldier, peace. The list is pretty much the same for all of us who sit on Santa's lap, head pressed into his red velvety chest, while black-locked hair brushes a tear, barely held back. The toys come, and with each passing year, we learn not to ask for them or the stream anymore.
Tom was less than 3 years old when she died. I remember it now, so I can tell you about it. I was saving lives. Zorro with a badge. Anyways, one night after having dinner at our favorite restaurant, we went back to the car and sat talking for a while. Nothing in particular, just things. Tom was at home with a sitter, and we still had a few hours to ourselves. After a while, Lily started to get amorous like she always did. Only I started to feel a little awkward because Millie was getting a little too amorous. Mostly, I didn't want to give our friends something to laugh about till hell freezes over, so I started the car. It was a simple device, really. A shotgun shell in a metal tube taped to the base of the steering column and wired to the car electrical system. Millie's head took the brunt of the glass. woke up in the hospital with hate and pieces of Millie's skull scattered throughout my chest. The doctors couldn't find all the bone fragments. And once in a while, one still worked his way out. I add them to her ashes. Nobody tried to remove the hate. After Millie's death, I got a lot of them. Sometimes legally, mostly by craft. The legal ones, I got through the courts. The others, I got by putting them against each other. It's hard to tell a dumb question from a setup, and I kept my friends in homicide pretty busy. But with each one I bagged, the hate grew. And I raised it like a second child. Tom and I grew alike, and whenever I bagged one, we celebrated with a big party. Yes. Aside from my sister and colleagues, there wasn't much help offered throughout the years. But I'm not supposed to expect that in my line of work, right? Maybe that's why I wasn't able to clean out the hate. He admired me, really. And I was equally proud of him. I don't know who really though. Anyways, a few years ago, the city's first serial murder case started. Had us really buzzed. The only common factor about the victims was that they were all hit in the temple at close range, usually while standing at a street corner or a bus stop. All hits were at night. The killer was bold, sometimes picking out a single individual amongst a small group. The witnesses, willing to talk, always described the killer as a man with an average build. His weapon, when seen, was always a white-handled pistol. One night, I couldn't sleep. Tom was out, and I was worried. So, I left for a walk in the old neighborhood. Me and Millie grew up there. It was nice back then. I was approaching the corner when I saw someone walk up to a man and shoot him in the side of the face. I couldn't get a good look at the murderer, so if I was going to get him, it would have to be now. The guy at the corner would have to wait. It was too crowded to shoot, so he ran, and I chased. Years of hate gave me the endurance I needed. This was a cold-blooded murder, and he was going to be mine. Yeah, I caught him trying to climb a far wall at a dead end. Never gave him a chance. Millie never had one. 2 rounds, and he crashed into the rubbish below him. A white-handled pistol landing a few feet in front of me. I could hear him groaning. So I took him amongst the rubbish only to hear his last words. Hi, Dad.
It was cancer, you know. Oh, I remember when we first met. And within a year we heard the words, "You may now kiss the bride." So I did. Clumsy and scared, I kissed her with more hunger than loving. And our kiss was both begun and ended not by us, but rather by the applause and cheers of our wedding guests. At first, hindered only by the inhibitions we had learned, we lived deep into each night, fully believing that we'd been united as one. We were naked children who still believed in magic, and were free to completely reveal ourselves to each other, but too cultured to do so. Eventually, with time and the endless inquiries from family and friends, we began to have a foreboding sense of obligation. After all, an heir, grandchildren were needed. To this end, the child within us began to take form. We wed to have children, not to love each other. With the birth of our first child, we became not merely children, but parents as well. And as was expected of us, we were good and responsible parents. And in doing so, our relationship became ritualized, as if in counterpoint to the spontaneity of our children. Some would say this was because passion wanes as love matures, but I believe that each generation diminishes so that the next may take its place. Thus, as they learn to speak, we learn the long rituals of silence. The peck on the cheek on the way out, followed by, "Hello, dear," on arrival at home. And that rare day when affection is openly expressed in public. In ritual, there are predictable results, but surely it would not have hurt our children to see us walking hand in hand in the park on a quiet Sunday afternoon. Oh, ours was a good marriage. We argued, but never in front of the children. And we loved, but never in front of each other. As we grew older together, I believe she never really knew how much I had learned to love her. I couldn't tell her. I simply had forgotten how. The mortician offered me some time alone with her. Just before the casket was to be closed, I accepted. After he left, I realized there were no more fears or inhibitions. No more expectations to be met. Simply two people who loved each other very much. And so, before we parted for the last time, I gave her a kiss. One kiss for a lifetime. One kiss, all our own.
The village was just one intermediate objective of a grand, orchestrated sweep. Third squad had been sent ahead at night to recon the village and keep it under surveillance, while the rest of the platoon moved up the following morning. They never called in. We all hoped for a dead radio. Not likely, but hope gets you through the darker hours of the night. The village was empty. No sign of the missing. First and second squad went on in pursuit of the rest of the sweep. My squad was left behind to search for the missing. If none of them were found within 1 hour, we were to move on and rejoin the rest of the platoon. Staying longer ran a high risk of us ending up missing also, and probably wouldn't produce any better results. But, as always, we'd stay until, one way or another, we took care of any dead or wounded we did manage to find, regardless of the cost. We cared about each other. The village was a monkey trap. A missing squad of bait. The whole damn place. One big monkey trap. We never did find 6 members of the squad. The other 4 were found nearby. All 4 had been disemboweled. Bitch is that one of them was still alive. Something like that can just ruin your whole day. People are strange. Often, the worse they're hurt, the greater the hope they'll get once help arrives. And to them, somehow everything will be all right. Their eyes show a lot. And a good medic can tell how badly they're hurt by one look at them. People care about the dying and will go to absurd lengths to prevent it. They care for it. This eases things a bit, but it also gives them hope. Besides, every once in a while, one of them makes it back due to a special doctor, nurse, simply dumb luck. Some of them make it back, and nobody really knows why. This one was young, strong, and obviously wanted to live. No medical help would be available, at least 3 hours. We had virtually nothing for the pain. Death was at least 6 or 7 hours away. It was inevitable without a miracle. Miracles weren't likely to occur without the kid's guts. I sent 3 members of my squad out looking for them. We all hoped one of the hotshot doctors we all knew so well somehow put them in again. The kid was delirious but still alive at sunset. Thirst, hunger, pain, obviously taking their toll. Word had already come in. There'd be no chance for medical evacuation before midnight, but
Also, the search party had come back with nothing but despair and tears in their eyes. Finally, we could let the kid go. Much of the kid's ordeal had been spent cradled in my arms while I sat singing softly. Love songs, ballads, nursery rhymes. Whatever seemed appropriate. So as I raised my weapon to the kid's head, I started to sing. Lullaby and goodbye.
Like so many others, my child died, screaming in pain. The doctors all said there was nothing they could do. The priests all said it was God's will. I made peace with the doctors, for what they said was truth. I tried to make peace with the priests, but what they said could not possibly be true. When questioned further, they defended their statement by claiming that I lacked the wisdom to fully understand God's will. I didn't believe this, but being willing to give God the benefit of the doubt, I raised the possibility that perhaps he merely lacked the wisdom to be a parent. Hearing this, they were angry and scoffing at me, could only answer, I'll pray for you. Those powerfully empty words stripped me of my remaining religious beliefs, and seeking only peace, I left the priests to be alone with their God. The drought began shortly afterward. There's much green again now, but driven by a need, I wandered over the face of this earth and witnessed much of our decline. Most of the cities and nations chose to dance with the drought rather than with each other, and adjusted to life without rain through the use of riots, civil wars, invasions. Soon much of our ability to provide basic needs, like medical care, education, ceased to exist, along with most of humanity. Drawn by rumors of its survival, I arrived in New Orleans 30 years into the drought, and was seated against a cathedral in Jackson Square when the crowd came by. From a passerby, I learned that the cathedral's priests had been run off by a ransacking mob a few years earlier and never seen again. Emptied of its priests, the cathedral had been abandoned by all the crazies. I figured no one would bother me if I sat next to it. The crowd was full of crazies. A badly beaten old man stood at the center while the group leader shouted that he was to be stoned to death, for he was a heathen. Oh, and as we all know, God's blessings will not fall upon the wicked anymore. The rains will return when the wicked among us are all gone. My past dragged me to his defense, but this crowd would not be reasoned with, threatened, or humiliated. Finally, sensing the inevitable, I raised my clenched fist in anger and shouted, "Surely Mary would have raised an atheist if her son had been born today, for he could not believe what was being said about his father." The crowd grew still, and my heart rose, only to be greeted with shouts of, "Stone her!" My last memories, before I passed out from the pain, were the sounds of the stones, shotgun blasts, and myself being dragged. Into the cathedral. Saved from the crowd by the residents of the cathedral. My mind drifted and broke apart and reformed as I was nursed back to health by my unexpected and perplexing friends. I soon learned that they were expecting me, but I couldn't see why. My confusion was frightening to all of us, so one evening they explained that early in the drought, a kind man had convinced the city to drill water wells to replace the Mississippi as its water source. As their nation died, the people came to believe that he was a prophet sent by God to deliver them from the drought. The man realized that they would die without hope, so he led them through as best he could, and often promised that the rains would return. Soon belief, became knowledge. The city grew wealthy and powerful because of its water and the promise of the rains. So when the man died, they quickly believed another into his place. However, the new prophet was greedy and cruel, and his followers killed anyone who spoke out against him. Worse yet, they took pride in killing him, for it both proved their fidelity to the prophet and allowed them to play a role in the promise of the rains. A few years before I arrived, all who lived in this city had been given the same dream. With his words, a messenger whose wrists have been pierced would free us all from the promise of the rains. Several of my friends said I was to be this messenger, for both my wrists had been pierced. While hearing this, I could not help but laugh and pointed to all the other injuries that had been inflicted by the crowd. However, my laughter ended when they told me that both they and the crowd had seen the wounds in my wrists take hold. This is why I had been stoned by my friends. Sensing my disbelief and fear, well, the group leader told me perhaps I simply had refused to hear the message I was to convey. We started to argue when a small child rose up and handed me a Bible. And told us both that perhaps the message could be found in them. Hearing this and remembering my experience with the crowd, I silently retreated to my room and began to read the book for the first time. As I read the book, I realized that much of what I had learned about the God of Abraham was untrue. Oh, far from being an unchanging entity that had no need for us, I came to know of a God that was being transformed by his own creation. Oh, the God of my priests would have no need to change his mind or feel vanity. Yet Moses saved his people from God's destruction at the foot of Mount Sinai by pointing out to God how embarrassed he would feel if the other people of the earth learned of his destructive behavior. As I read the history of our relationship, I saw him gradually transform from a jealous, easily angered, self-centered, unpredictable being to a loving one, very much concerned about his children. Like any earthly parent, he was poorly prepared for the role and found himself having rather embarrassing bursts of anger. But mostly, he learned by loving mistakes, by delighting in the growth of his children. With this view of our relationship in mind, it becomes evident he needs to communicate with us, and we with him. Perhaps even like ourselves, he fears being abandoned by those he loves. For much of human misery can be found in the times when God could only be reached by proxy. In reality, we all have a role in communicating with him. Looking back on the death of my child, I realized we have many roles to play in his transformation if we choose to accept them. He will indeed wipe away all of our tears, but only if we allow him to learn how. Night after night, I conveyed my new insights to my friends while we talked endlessly, relaxed amidst laughter and storytelling and music. Fueled by a warmth I had not felt in years, I was unconcerned that my tenuous insights were rapidly becoming their personal beliefs. However, they never told me that during the day they were zealously conveying these newly adopted beliefs to the residents of the city at large, and that many outside the cathedral had come to believe that the prophet was now among them. Why they were removed from the cathedral to a less obvious location is beyond me, but one night the prophet and some of his followers started a small blaze in the cathedral. While running to extinguish it, my friends and I were quickly surrounded and carted off while our home burned. Taken to an abandoned shrine. The prophet chose 2 of my friends and me to be bound to blackened marble crosses at its center. And we watched in terror while piles of dead wood were silently placed around us. Having been accused of nothing, the first of us to to be burned could only shout his hatred from the flames, while the prophet and his followers silently looked on, and the rest of my friends screamed. They waited until their first offering grew silent before torching the next, and smirked when he begged for his life while struggling to loosen his bonds. Sadly, his efforts to free himself only resulted in him meeting death, bowing into the flames. I had hoped to die with dignity, but my body was already blistered when they brought the flames to me. And trying to avoid the hatred in their eyes, I looked in the sky and found myself shouting, "God damn you! Save me!" Moments later, it thundered and began to rain.
In the spring, a family with a boat came and took my place. Together we broke up the raft and gave the dead to the river, hoping they would somehow understand. Several years later, I passed through the town again. The bridge had been rebuilt. The boat was gone, and the town had become a prosperous city. A small cafe named the Raft stood near the bridge. I asked a waiter about its name, but he only knew what had been printed in the menu. The menu only stated that the cafe had been named for a raft that had been used to cross the river before the present bridge was built. And it was said to have been elegant in its simplicity of design and use of native materials. Nobody else knew anything more.